When a few weeks ago the Greek government announced a referendum in Greece to determine whether or not the people would back the government in rejecting the latest offer on the table from the EU group and the Troika, there was shock and horror in Brussels. A referendum, actual democracy, asking the people what they think, unheard of. Huge attacks on Alexis Tsipras in the European media, in the financial press. This is populism, this is unacceptable, this is a slap in the face of the Eurogroup, and the Greeks went ahead. Now, the question posed in the referendum was slightly convoluted, but it was clear enough. It was whether the people supported the government in rejecting the last offer from the EU group in Brussels. That was clear. That was what the Greek government was proposing in the referendum. The European Union leadership went on the offensive. This Dutch pipsqueak, Bloom, who is also the president of the Eurogroup, appointed by the dominant powers, i.e. the Germans, said that this was unacceptable. The German government and its spokespeople said that the real question the Greek people were being asked was whether to stay in or out of the euro, and they threatened and blackmailed them. They said, if you vote no, you will be out of the euro. And in order to stress this fact, the ECB instructed the Greek banks to tighten the flow of liquid cash, of money, inside Greece, to punish the ordinary people in that country, to make them feel, oh my God, if we vote no, this is going to get worse. And they thought that they had pulled it off. They thought it was a very close vote. The opinion polls showed for about 3 days before the referendum that it was 51%, 48%, shifting, changing. All this turned out to be fantasyland because the Eurogroup and the media completely underestimated the anger in Greece. They had no idea what people were really feeling. I remember on a trip to Greece just a few weeks before the referendum, talking to ordinary people on the streets, asking them what they thought. Quite a few were depressed because no one wants to be in a messy situation economically, but the overwhelming majority said it's bad, but we're fed up with being blackmailed. We're fed up with being humiliated. We're fed up with being insulted and treated as second-class citizens by these big guns in Europe, so we are going to vote no. And that is what happened. The vote was amazing. 61% of the Greeks who voted όχι, no. And Greece celebrated like it had not celebrated for a very long time. The demonstrations, the mass mobilizations in the big cities and on the small islands celebrated the no vote, and they were the largest demonstrations since the end of the military dictatorship in the 70s. So what happened then? What happened is that the Greek government said we now have the backing of our people and went back to the Eurogroup. But what we cannot doubt now is the anger of the Greek people with what has happened. And the anger relates very much to democracy, democratic accountability, how Europe should function, and how it is functioning. And this takes us back to the event that opened up this whole crisis in Europe. When financialized capitalism went under in 2008, the Atlantic storm spread rapidly to Europe. The scale of the disaster was such that Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize-winning economist, regular writer in the American media, compared the Wall Street crash to the fall of the Berlin Wall. He was convinced that this was the end of neoliberalism, that new structures would be put into place to correct these mistakes for a long time to come. Wrong, alas, on both counts. The European Union rejected the notion of any stimulus except to the banks, whose recklessness, backed by mainstream politicians, had been responsible for the crisis in the first place. And if one looks at the amount of money that was doled out by taxpayers in Europe and the United States of America to the banks, the figure runs into trillions, literally trillions. And compared to that, the debt owed by Greece after following the policies of the European Union and the Troika faithfully and loyally from 2008 to 2011, that debt that Greece had incurred was trivial, both compared to the EU budget in general and to the amount paid even to a single of the big banks that were bailed out in 2008. So what was the problem? The problem was that they did not wish to make any shifts that could damage capitalist profits, that could damage the whole process of financialization, which they had insisted was the only way forward. And they, as I said at the time, what they're doing is putting a huge, big sticking plaster on a wound that goes very deep. And that sticking plaster didn't work. After following the policies imposed on them by the Troika, the results in those years were horrific for the Greek people. Almost 213,000 Greeks applied for the government's humanitarian crisis relief program. The majority needed help with getting food, while a small number need help paying rent and getting electricity. The percentage of children in Greece living in poverty up from 23% in 2008 to 40.5% in 2011. The position Greece is ranked in Europe according to the percentage of population at risk of poverty and social exclusion, third. The number of young people unemployed in Greece as of March 2015, 49.7%. The number of Greeks who don't have access to electricity as of February 2015, 300,000. The number of Greeks that are not adequately fed, according to the Prolepsis Institute of Preventive Medicine, 54%. Increase in the rate of suicide in Greece since 2011, 35%. The number of people in Greece that are homeless as of 2013, 20,000. The number has doubled since 2009. The increase of the tax burden on the poorest Greeks from 2008 to 2012, 337%. The equivalent increase for the richest Greeks was just 9%. The number of pensioners in Greece living below the poverty line, 45%. Pensions have declined by 27% between 2010 and 2014. So, given these conditions, Syriza, party of the radical left in Greece, came up with a set of proposals to reverse this. They said that Greece is being punished, that the Greek people cannot take the strain any longer, and that what is needed is a new program. A new deal was their phrase for Greece, which reverses what has been going on and makes life for the ordinary people of that country slightly better. This was not a utopian program. It was just designed to increase the living wages of people, cut down unemployment, have a minimum wage, etc. The Thessaloniki program adopted by Syriza as it prepared for the elections in 2015 was very clear. The National Reconstruction Plan would focus on 4 major pillars to reverse the social and economic disintegration of the country. What were these pillars? The first pillar was to confront the humanitarian crisis. The second was to restart the economy and promote tax justice. The third was to regain employment, which meant creating more jobs. The fourth pillar was transforming the political system to deepen democracy. All these pillars effectively meant costing everything. The first pillar, which was to dealing with the humanitarian crisis confronting the country, the total estimated costs were 1.8 billion. The money required, under 2 billion, for dealing with the humanitarian crisis is, to be frank, peanuts. It's a tiny amount of money in the scale of things. A comprehensive grid of emergency interventions so as to raise a shield of production for the most vulnerable social strata. Then the Syriza pledged free electricity for 300,000 households currently under the poverty line, up to 300 kilowatts per month per family, that is 3,600 kilowatts per year, total cost 59.4 million euros. A program of meal subsidies to 300,000 families without any income at all, and the plan was to implement this via a public agency of coordination in cooperation with the solidarity organizations, the church, etc. The total cost, 756 million euros. Housing guarantees, initially to just build 30,000 apartments by subsidizing rent at 3 euros per meter. Total cost, 54 million euros. Restitution of the Christmas bonus as 13th pension to 1.2 million pensioners with a pension up to 700 euros. Total cost, 543 million euros. Free medical and pharmaceutical care for the uninsured, unemployed. Total cost, 350 million euros. And we can go on and on. Every single measure that the Syriza government was intending to propose was on this scale. It's not a large amount of money. So what happened? Why did the Eurogroup oppose this? When Syriza was elected in January and went for the first meeting on the 20th of February with the Eurogroup, the meeting was in Berlin, they were told bluntly that their program was unacceptable. The decision was taken clearly by the EU leaders and the EU elites to say that even these modest, mild, but necessary reforms wouldn't be tolerated, not because they couldn't be tolerated economically, but because politically they were explosive. If we let the Greeks do this, was the argument. Tomorrow Podemos in Spain will be asking for similar things. The day after that, Ireland will be asking for very similar measures, and then the Portuguese, and then it will just change the balance of forces within Europe and damage the policies that we have been imposing and dent the pillar of austerity, i.e. neoliberal economics with a vengeance, by which we have made the rich richer. That was the thinking, and that thinking prevailed. So when the Syriza team arrived, they were told that their program was not acceptable. The only two concessions they made were effectively to say that, okay, if you're upset, we won't call the Troika, we will call it the institutions. I mean, I myself doubt very strongly that this was a concession, but never mind. The other concession, and this was a concession, was that the members of the Troika would not be allowed to enter different ministries in Greece and supervise everything, as they had been doing till then, and that the EU group agreed would change. Later, they would go back even on this minor concession. Now, in my opinion, the Syriza leadership made a tactical error. When they went back home after the 20th of February this year, they claimed they had won a victory. They hailed it as a triumph. It was a mistake, but not a huge mistake, because people soon found out what had actually happened. And in all the subsequent negotiations that took place, they were pressed, pushed, driven against the wall, and they gave up more and more and more of their program, till in the last few months, they had very little dispute with the EU at all. Why? And here I think one has to say that there was a strategic loss of nerve by Syriza, that they couldn't argue for the program, because to argue for this program against the entire weight of the EU leaders, they got no support from any other government within the European Union, and they gave up because they thought that the European Union was something extremely important and something that they had to defend, and they believed in. And this, in my opinion, was a problem, because the Europe that Greeks signed up to in 1981 has changed. When the Greek government of PASOK, the Social Democrats under Papandreou, joined the European club, things were different. You know, there was still a boom taking place. The Greek economy benefited, and Europe offered, or thought it was offering, some alternative to the Thatcherite model in the United Kingdom and the Reaganite model in the United States. This would be a social Europe. That was the argument deployed in 1981, and it was believed, but it never actually became a social Europe or a social democratic Europe, because rapidly Thatcherite views of how the economy should be run, financialization, neoliberalism, the manuals of Hayek crossed the channel into Europe, and the European Union effectively, especially after the Maastricht Treaty, became a neoliberal union. A union that was backing only one economic model, and that is the model we know. After 2008, they should have changed, but they didn't. And it was because they didn't change that we had countries like Spain and Greece, in particular the Mediterranean countries, seeing the birth of new mass movements, new social movements on different levels, and challenging the existing structures of the European Union by putting forward a different politics. This was the challenge, and the Germans decided that this challenge had to be defeated, and Greece had to be humiliated in such a way that the whole of Europe would get a message: don't fool around with us. If you fool around with us, we're going to deal with you like we've dealt with the Greeks. And here, the Syriza leaders pressed against the wall, insulted at EU group meetings, denounced in brutal language by the German finance minister Schäuble and his acolytes and water carriers from the small states, small town bullies. That's what they behaved like as far as Greece was concerned. And then Tsipras played one of his trump cards, and that was the referendum. And beneath the gaze of Europe, 60% of Greeks voted to defend their government against the European group, the Euro group. What to do? Couldn't be denied. And this measure and this vote and the size of it actually created rifts inside the European Union. The Americans were angry that it had been allowed to go this far. The IMF in Washington said debt relief had to be part of the agenda, which was not the view of the Germans, who said no debt relief at all. And so the game went on. And it's now reaching its end. Basically, the situation is this. There are many, many mainstream economists who, before the referendum, said that they would vote no. And these included Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman and many others in and outside Greece, who said that if a no vote led Greece to quit the Eurozone, it was not such a huge disaster as it was being portrayed. That Greece would recover in time, and that if this is what the people were voting for, fine. Don't be blackmailed into voting yes, and they weren't. Now, it's very difficult to enter mass psychology. What did people in Greece think they were voting for? And the Greek people asserted their sovereignty in dramatic fashion in front of the whole world. Messages of support coming from South America, Fidel Castro writing to Tsipras and saying congratulations on the referendum, the Venezuelans, the Bolivians, the Ecuadorians sending messages of support. It heartened everyone in the world who enjoys it when the underprivileged fight back and win. The Greek people reasserted their sovereignty. Will their government? This is the big question, because we now have a huge contradiction which goes as follows. The Greek government committed almost genetically to an old model of the European Union, has, in my opinion, failed to analyze what the modern European Union is, i.e. the structure, the institution, not Europe or the idea of Europe. And having failed to grasp this, they are committed to staying in the Eurozone. The Germans want them out of the Eurozone. There's no doubt about that. Schäuble made a direct offer to Alexis Tsipras. This was not reported in public. I was told that this had happened in Athens when I was last there. And recently, the French online daily newspaper, investigative newspaper, Mediapart, interviewed a senior Greek official who remained anonymous, who had been participating in the negotiations, and he pointed out that they had been bullied and blackmailed, and that when the decision was announced to the Eurogroup that Greece was going for a referendum, they asked the Greek finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, to leave the room. He describes it as follows. The Europeans excluded Varoufakis after the announcement of the referendum. There was a desire for humiliation. Varoufakis asked, "Who decided that?" Dijsselbloem replied, "I decided." Would it not have to be a vote? This decision, would it not have been taken unanimously? In a normal operation, of course. But the Eurogroup, this is not necessary for them because there is no written record. Also, there's nothing formal. Nobody can say, "Did you really say that? Let's look at the report." There are no minutes of any discussion. And later on, in this very revealing article, the anonymous Greek minister or advisor says, Schäuble is dangerous because he constantly says you will not get the funding. German banks want their money. It's an organization where you can't make your voice heard. No one spoke openly apart from Varoufakis. Schäuble then said, how much do you want to exit the euro? The Germans were offering the Greeks money behind the scenes to exit the euro. Now, it's debatable whether or not the Greeks should have accepted, and it's being discussed within Syriza itself. In my opinion, there was everything to gain by having an amicable break with the Eurozone and demanding two things: a large, substantial write-off of the debt and a sum of money to implement their program over the next 2 years. Now, this would have required negotiations, but it's not impossible that they might have gained that in private negotiations with the Germans and the Greek people. This obsession with a currency, with staying inside the Eurozone, is a bit inexplicable. Because what it is going to mean as the negotiations come to an end, what it is going to mean is this, that effectively the Syriza government has caved in on every single element of their program, which I talked about a few minutes ago. They have given up on their program, and the only discussion which is now left to take place is whether there will be debt relief or not. Let's say that the Americans pressure the Germans into agreeing to 50%, if we're lucky, debt relief and writing off the debt. As happened, it's worth remembering, in 1953, in the last century, when many countries agreed to write off the German debt after the Second World War, including Greece. Greece agreed to write off 50% of the debt that the Germans owed to Greece. The other 50% has yet to be paid, and that debt could be part of negotiations for a cool, smooth exit from the Eurozone as well. But we shall see what happens. And we saw. On the 12th of July 2015, the Syriza leaders assembled in Brussels surrendered in the most servile and abject fashion to the EU elite. The barbarians had marched straight through open gates. Tsipras and his colleagues had already abandoned their political program. Now they sold their souls. The conditions they have accepted will increase tenfold the misery and suffering of their people. Thirsting for water at high noon, the Greek people now find that it has been turned into salt. Whichever way you look at it, this is a huge defeat for progressive politics in Europe.